Warm greetings, everybody. It's a great honour to be here, and I do feel a bit fish out of water, being a political scientist speaking in a room of mostly scientists. But I think what connects us, well, there's a lot that connects us actually, but one of the things that connects us is that many of us are interested in doing work that is useful to our society. And we hear the word policy a lot, and it's the political scientists who theorise the policy, or ideas about policy and public administration. So I want to share with you some of my observations about the state of academic freedom in New Zealand, something that concerns us all very much, and also what's called the critic and conscience role of the academic. It's written into the guiding legal document of our New Zealand universities, but I would wonder how many of you have read the Education and Training Act. Could you put your hands up if you have? Oh, bravo. There's 3 or 4 of you. The rest of you, please go have a look at it. You ought to, because the universities base their policies on it, or they're supposed to. Well, according to, there's many things I'll explain to you in a minute about the Education and Training Act of 2020. It was updated. The original one was 1989, and I think they're our forebears who wrote it, because not every society in the world has a piece of legislation like that, and we are very, very fortunate. It's very precious to have some of the rights that have been enshrined in that legislation. Our academics have a crucial role in a modern democracy. We can offer informed commentary, independent research, and provide new ways of thinking. And yet New Zealand scientists and social scientists, as has been demonstrated in academic papers, and as I have experienced myself, have been under increasing pressure. It could be from corporations or even foreign governments, to avoid raising uncomfortable truths. And our New Zealand universities are dependent on external funding to balance their books. They don't champion or promote academic freedom. And some universities actually appear to be putting limits on academic freedom and pressuring their academics not to rock the boat. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about your rights and, in fact, your role within the legislation to perform the part of the critic and conscience of our society. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about my own experience of being a critic and conscience, and show you how you also could make a contribution to do that. And I include the practical aspect because I know myself, when I was thinking about, when I realised that I'd had some information that I felt that the New Zealand public really ought to know about, I didn't know initially how I could make a contribution to our society. And I have learnt since many, many ways that I think more of us ought to be able to do as well. And they're not that hard. So first of all, let me point your attention to the wording of the Education and Training Act. And the crucial words that I'm looking at is the highlighted ones, that universities accept a role as critic and conscience of society. That is what they are supposed to be doing. It goes on to say about academic freedom, the freedom of academic staff and students within the law, that universities should be able to have this, that they would be within the law to question and test received wisdom, to put forward new ideas, and to state controversial or unpopular opinions. So that's what our universities are supposed to be encouraging us to do. And on university leadership, particularly our vice-chancellors, this is what they are supposed to be doing. They should be imbuing the employees of the university with a spirit of service, both to the institution and to the wider community, in other words, our democracy. and they should be managing the universities in a responsible manner that reflects the needs of academic freedom. But do they? I had a look at our collective employment agreement at the University of Canterbury, and in our collective employment agreement it says, right in the first section on the terms of employment, that staff shall have the right within the law to act as a critic and conscience of society. I also read the employment agreement of the Lincoln University, and I found that you don't have that wording there. So for those of you at other universities of New Zealand, you might want to look at the wording of your employment agreement. Now, just because it's not in the employment agreement doesn't mean that the Employment Act and the Education and Training Act doesn't apply to you. But it is good to have it in the collective agreement. So those of you who are active in TEU on your campuses, I reckon that you might want to move in your next bargaining to have that inserted in there, because I think we do really need to remind our university leadership these days that we have a specific role in our society. Our government and our people expect us to be the conscience and critic of our society and expect that we are enjoying the benefits of academic freedom. Now, our Education and Training Act and the policy that is at my university on academic freedom is based on international thinking on academic freedom. So the 1997 UNESCO recommendation concerning the status of higher education and teaching personnel stated that academics should have freedom in carrying out research and disseminating and publishing the results thereof, freedom to express freely their opinion about the institution or system in which they work, freedom from institutional censorship. So it's not just New Zealand, but it is an international norm that we academics will be playing the critic and conscience role within our societies, and that our societies will support us in that. However, we are in a rather dire era, as you might have noticed, the era of misinformation, of disinformation, and unfortunately we also have a weak media. And in political science, we call the media the fourth estate. They're a balance and a check on power. But our journalists don't have time to do in-depth reports anymore, or even read anything in-depth that we might have written as academic specialists. So in this time of a weakened information environment where there is circulating harmful ideas, we have some very big challenges facing our societies. The global political order is shifting. We are seeing breaking of international norms, and New Zealand's security is very reliant on a rules-based international order and the level playing field. We're seeing great environmental challenges such as climate change, and of course we're experiencing a pandemic, the like of which we have never seen before. And we need all the more than ever before that expertise from the academics, the critics and conscience of society who will raise those sometimes uncomfortable truths and provide information to enable our legislations to pass good new legislation, and for our society to understand the reasons why. And David Edwards from UNESCO has spoken on this in the context of our current international environment. And he says that a free teaching position must inculcate students with the values of democracy and the competencies of healthy skepticism, critical thinking, scientific methods, understanding of history and media and internet literacy. So I want to share with you my own experiences of stepping up and being a critic and conscience in our society, and also internationally too. I was your typical bookish academic a nerd, as one of my friends calls me. And it was material information that I found in my own research and in conversations that I had with foreign policy practitioners within our government, trying to share the information that I had and thinking, initially, well, our government will have this all under control, won't they? They'll have the answers to this, and discovering that that wasn't the case, that I began the journey of having a increasingly public role. And I can tell you it was very uncomfortable. I'm not naturally an extrovert. I like people, but this public role is not within my normal comfort zone. But I stepped up because in the end I knew that no one else would, and that I had knowledge and expertise that would be useful for our government and for many other governments. So the first thing that I got involved with is through my research on China's interests in the Arctic and Antarctic and their wider maritime strategy, I began to wonder how our lovely country, Aotearoa New Zealand, could face up to and meet the challenges of the changing global order. And it wasn't a simple answer. It wasn't just about our one bilateral relationship. We had to look at a whole series of our relationships, of our international partnerships, and also our involvement in international organisations. As I said, the global order is changing and the international norms are threatened. So our participation, both in the international system and our relationships with individual countries, needed a new proactive strategy. And so eventually, seeing that no one else was going to do it, the government doesn't have the resources for this kind of in-depth thinking, I gathered together a team of academics, first international partners, specialists on small states theory, because New Zealand is a small state, and then gathered the New Zealand academics for focusing on the New Zealand aspect of this for a project I called Small States in the New Security Environment. And we called it a Preparedness initiative, so proactively looking ahead of what New Zealand should do. The work was meant to be, and is, policy relevant, and yet theoretically informed. And I made my participants write 1,500-word policy briefs. We later turned them into chapters, so we could tick the box for our universities and have Scopus outputs. And they're more in depth, but even the writing of that edited book is, I told my authors to write like you're writing for the New York Times, and short sentences, active voice, and so on. And so these 1,500-word policy briefs are the sort of thing that a minister can read, as I would say, but in the limousine from the airport to their next destination, and focused on very specific policy issues that we need to think about more. And the policy briefs, the audience that we imagined was for the politicians, but also for the media, and there have indeed been stories that have been built off our policy briefs. I also organised 2 events. The first in 2017 was a hui on New Zealand foreign policy, and I called it a hui because the format was not talking at, but engaging, and it was a safe space where we exchanged ideas on very sensitive topics, and all the more so for the 2018 wānanga, which I organised at Rapaki Marae on New Zealand-China relations, where we had senior politicians, policy people, as well as academics attending and sharing our experience. I also set up a pop-up think tank because I didn't want to waste money on overheads. And so it's still there. You can have a look on it on our website at the University of Canterbury, the SANS pop-up think tank. Last year, I set up a special series for doing some forward thinking about what we're going to do in this post-COVID-19 scenario in our foreign policy and our economy and so on. So that was my first foray into doing foreign policy work and stepping up into this critic and conscience role. And the next actually began about the same year, just by chance, was my research, which raised the issue of the Chinese Communist Party's political interference in New Zealand, but also internationally. And it was just one of those things. I was invited to be in an edited book project, but what I found in my research was well above and beyond anything I'd wait for 3 years of academic publishing to come out. And it was indeed 3 years before the editorial book was finally published. So I released my conference paper ahead of time. It's called Magic Weapons, China's Political Influence Activities under Xi Jinping, to the think tank that I'm affiliated with as a global fellow, because they have the platform there, and it was immediately got international attention. I was interviewed by New York Times, and I don't know how many interviews I did in the next 2 days after that, and had a huge impact on strategic thinking in the US. It was earlier this year acknowledged by the National Security Council of the US that it helped to shape the Indo-Pacific strategy, and has had an impact on international thinking of many countries, from the UK to France, Denmark, the Baltics, and so on. And it's 57 pages long, and it has hundreds of footnotes, because I wasn't going to be talking about stuff like that without a lot of evidence. But I knew that many politicians, as well as journalists and other interested people, would be afraid to read a document as long as that. So I wrote a 1,500-word policy brief in 2017, just as the coalition government was announced. I released my policy brief, which summarised a new template for New Zealand-China relations. And to my delight, my words have been echoed by our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister this year about strategies we should follow. And I know I've been confirmed by officials that they have, in fact, very much, that my work has really shaped a lot of the things that have happened. Although you wouldn't know it from the media reporting on it, which continues to be very weak on this issue. As I mentioned, I organised a wānanga in 2018 that helped to move the debate a bit forward that was already underway internally within our government, whether we would balance, which was more important, national security or economic security. In the end, thankfully, national security won out. And then also in 2018 was when the government decided to launch an inquiry into China's political interference activities. And at first it was meant to be closed door, but I heard about it by chance and was encouraged to apply, and which I did. And then there was a media storm in February about it, and I encouraged more people also to write, and so that they wanted to give testimony. And so it was just this natural, organic thing where our society was able to participate in the wider society in the policy process. And then there was a further parliamentary inquiry last year into political interference in local government. And it's led to new legislation on political donations, the reform of the Overseas Investment Act, changed national security priority. Foreign interference is the top priority of SIS now since December 2018. There's going to be change in local government. Also, I draw your attention to this trusted research guidelines with which the Universities New Zealand and SIS have been in discussion with for a while, and it was very quietly announced in March this year. All of us individually would be responsible if we had an unfortunate relationship with where you're passing on military sensitive or police-related research or information, know-how to a partner university in China that was connected with the PLA, or even if it wasn't, in fact, according to the new legislation that was, changes to the management of this kind of research in New Zealand. So you can have a look at the protective security link there. If you haven't heard about it, you should look it up. And you can look at the change guidelines on the strategic goods, which was updated in October last year. So what I have done is I've done lots of parliamentary submissions. I've given oral testimony to Parliament. I've done 20 op-eds, 9 policy briefs, met with lots of New Zealand MPs, given presentations in parliaments of Australia and Canada, and talked to many, many governments, plus lots of media commentary. And I created a basic template for how to do a policy brief, which you are welcome to borrow from. And you'll see on my pop-up think tank that all the policy papers follow that guideline. And my op-ed as well. I taught myself how to write an op-ed, and it was confirmed to me by one of the top, the Asia editor of the Financial Times, that I have it right. You begin with a news peg, you have to have a strong opening sentence, and the journalists call this your ball statement. We'd call it an ovary statement or a lead. What is it you're trying to tell me? What's your opinion on the news? And don't make it any later than the third paragraph. You must have short sentences. You must use active voice. Persuade me. Make me want to read this thing. And end it with a grenade in the last line, if at all possible. And for the parliamentary submission, I didn't know how to write a parliamentary submission when I started. You might want to tell people why you're the person to comment on this issue. You need to respond directly to the terms of the inquiry. To my amazement, I found others participating in the inquiries I was involved in did not reply to what was actually asked and were off on their own tangents. Well, that's not helpful. Provide some expert policy advice. Try and connect what you're saying to the existing legislation. You can help the MPs to improve on that legislation. And again, active voice, avoiding jargon, short sentences. And when it's your chance to give oral testimony, speak to the MPs, give them something new, and be prepared to be challenged. I wasn't prepared the first time round. They set someone up to disagree with me, who, without telling me, who wasn't even on the panel. But that's part of the process. You've got to be able to argue your point. And then afterwards, you're going to have to talk to the media, and you might want to write an op-ed. So the concluding paragraph of my famous paper called Magic Weapons went as follows. Democracies have magic weapons too. We have the right to choose our government, balances and checks on power through the courts. Our regulatory bodies, such as the Commerce Commission and the Press Council, the legally supported critic and conscience role of the academic, freedom of speech and association, and the fourth estate. Now is the time to use them. Thank you.